When you have a character who's really motivated, they don't need to be likable necessarily. We may not like them. We may even actively root against them, but we want to know what's going to happen to them.
How do you develop authentic and relatable characters? This week, Zamil Akhtar returns for a second conversation with me. Zamil is the author of the smash sensation Gunmetal Gods. This book series has gained massive attention in the online book community, and the Kickstarter special edition raised over $115,000.
This was a big project I've been working on for really 2 years, getting the art together, getting the design done, and just making it as awesome as I could, like the dream collector's edition for Gunmetal God.
I had Zamil on last year to discuss his book, and now he's back, doing a deep dive into character development and how to navigate the pitfalls of building unlikable characters that your readers will still root for.
These characters, they can't be 100% irredeemable. There always has to be this small hope that they will heal themselves and change. Having that there gives some readers more of a reason to stomach them and to hope.
We discuss character motivations, challenges and growth, and how you can keep your readers engaged with what your characters are doing.
Within the first few chapters, it was very clear to the reader who these characters were, what their pain points are, what they're, why they're feeling the way they're feeling. The reader should know their motivation, within a few chapters.
And we also dive into Zamil's journey as a writer, more about Gunmetal Gods, and in particular, his latest installment, Dark Drinker.
Dark Drinker takes place in the Western continent. So it was a chance for me to write a different aesthetic and sort of something very different. More of a Western fantasy, but in the Greek and Roman sense.
This is a great conversation and is a masterclass on character development. Whether you're looking to improve your own characters or you're a fan of dark fantasy, I hope you stick around. What does it take to become a successful science fiction or fantasy writer? You're listening to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, the show that aims to provide you with writing tips, tricks, and inspiration for your author career by chatting with other successful science fiction and fantasy authors. I am your host, Herman Stuarnagel. I'm an author who is eager to learn more. I hope you'll join me in these conversations to learn and grow in your own writing, and maybe to find a new favorite book or author along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. Welcome once again to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. Zamil Akhtar, welcome back. I'm so excited to have you here again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're so welcome. How have you? Can you believe it's been a year since we last chatted?
I honestly had no idea it had been that long.
I know. I was looking at.
Feels like it was just a few months ago.
I know, right? I was looking at the schedule, and I was looking at when we last talked, and it was. I think that episode aired in October of 2023. So it'll be pretty much exactly a year when this comes out. But I'm glad that when I reached out, you were happy to come back on and willing to talk about your upcoming book. And we're going to talk about your series a bit more as a whole, because last time when we chatted, I hadn't read Gunmetal Gods. I read Gunmetal Gods and I loved it, and I went right into Conqueror's Blood. And I'm going to carry right on to book 3 as soon as I'm able to. I just finished Conqueror's Blood yesterday, actually. But yeah, I'm absolutely loving the series, so I'm excited to talk to you about it. And we're going to delve in a bit more about your characters and whatnot today. So yeah, pretty excited. So for those of you who didn't catch our first interview and might not know who you are, can you just give us a little bit, about your background and about your writing journey?
Yeah, so I'm Zamil Akhtar, author of the Gunmetal Gods saga, which now is a 4-book series, and it also has one novella. I also write Lightblade, which is a progression fantasy series, very different from Gunmetal Gods, which is like cosmic horror fantasy. I got my start in horror, which is why my Gunmetal Gods series has so many horror elements. I think the thing I really love is to combine fantasy and horror and to just explore that sort of the way these two speculative fiction genres can merge and complement each other. So that's what the Gunmetal Gods series has all been about.
Yeah, really cool. Now, what when was the first? We didn't talk a whole lot about your writing back on the first interview. I went back and listened to our show here earlier this week, but so I'm interested in knowing like what was kind of your first inspirations in starting to, I guess, read horror and fantasy, but also to write it. When I guess let's start with what were some of your the early inspirations for reading and whether it's TV or books or whatever. What were some of those early inspirations for you?
When I was a kid, at a very early age. I remember my older brother and older sister. They would lock me in a room and put on Nightmare on Elm Street, and
Oh, really?
these like horrific horror movies, right? And they
Oh,
would
gee.
like force me to watch them.
Oh, wow.
Um, and the funny thing is, now I love horror, but they like hate horror. So it's like really bizarre. But anyway, that's sort of like I think that at a young age, I got introduced to horror, and
Okay.
when a horror movie comes out, I will always watch it.
Hmm.
With fantasy, I think it was really playing video games that got me into it. At a very young age, I think when I was in third grade, playing like Final Fantasy and
Nice.
playing, Dragon Age and other sort of fantasy video games.
That's
And I
really cool.
didn't really start reading a lot of fantasy and a lot of horror until much later, like when I was in college. Um, and that's sort of when I realized, okay, I want to write I want to write, I want to write fantasy, I want to write horror,
Hmm.
and I didn't really have the confidence to do it until I started writing horror on Reddit for the No Sleep subreddit,
Okay.
and those horror stories I wrote over there were pretty successful, and people loved them, and that sort of gave me confidence to go on and write like Gunmetal Gods.
That's really cool. I love that. Now, yeah, I want to touch on a couple things you mentioned there because of that you playing Final Fantasy as a video game. Kind of as your introduction to fantasy. I never really thought about that, and I mean, you're kind of the first person that had mentioned video games as your entry point, and I love that because like I was thinking about, it, I'm like, yeah, that was actually probably my first entry point into the fantasy genre as well. Playing Final Fantasy and Zelda and those kind of games as a kid because I didn't find fantasy books until I was in my teens. So like I was a early fan of sci-fi. Like I was kind of brought up on Star Trek and that sort of thing, but fantasy didn't find me until later on. Because I mean, when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of good fantasy movies or shows out. Like they were all pretty cheesy at that time. So even then, like, but yeah, like I mean, I love playing Final Fantasy in those games. So I love that that was one of your early influences. That's really cool.
Yeah, and
And the
like
second,
some of those games are like massive and epic, right? So
yeah,
like
exactly, yeah,
it
they
people
really have
people
these big epic fantasy stories built into them. That I mean, I guess that I realize like now some of the games I play that the stories are pretty epic and they've got some good storytelling in them. But I think as a kid, I didn't realize that that's why I enjoyed them. So that's really cool. I appreciate you mentioning that. And the second point I just wanted to touch on there is I really like your siblings made you watch horror. It sounded like to be mean to you,
yeah.
but it ended up backfiring, and you ended up loving it, and it really inspired your future career. So I think that's really cool as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because if when my sister comes over and I ask her if she wants to watch horror, now she's like, no, 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 never. You know,
Did they
so
like
it's
it as
like,
as a kid? Like, did they like it when you were kids?
yeah,
Okay,
definitely they did. So it's like,
okay.
you know, and I didn't like it. I didn't like being locked in a room at the time.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. Okay. Yeah, I thought I wasn't sure if they were throwing you in a room and making you making you watch it, or if they were enjoying it and just and making you stick it out. So yeah, really cool. So now, yeah, we chatted a year ago. Can you give us a bit of an update because you've had a lot happen over the course of the last year. Can you just give us a little bit of details about what has happened since we last talked?
Yeah, the biggest thing was the Gunmetal Gods Kickstarter, which we launched in November last year, and it ended at around $115,000 in funding. This was a
It's so
big project
incredible.
I've been working on for like really 2 years before the Kickstarter launched, getting the art together, getting the design done, and just making it as awesome as I could. Like the dream the Dream Collector's Edition for Gunmetal Gods, and it was really well received. So that that was incredible to see the community receive it so well.
Definitely.
And since then, I've been working on the fourth Gunmetal Gods book, which released just a few days ago uh, in September, early September. So it's,
Yeah.
I've been working on that for, most of the year. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. Still waiting on the reviews and stuff. The ARC reviews and the beta readers all said it was great, but still waiting on what the readers think. So, Gunmetal Gods is on its fourth book, and soon I'll be starting another novella, the second novella in the series,
Okay.
and then I'll get to work on the fifth book.
Oh, nice. Really cool. Well, since we're on the topic, can you just tell us a little bit of Gunmetal Gods? You touched on it briefly there in kind of your intro, but just tell us a bit about the series and what it's all about for those who may have missed the first interview.
Sure. So it's like the first book is sort of a Crusades retelling with Lovecraftian gods on both sides, and it's told from two first person points of view that are dueling with each other on opposite sides. And it's got, yeah, like I said, it's got a ton of horror elements put in there. So you've got the epic fantasy battles, and then you've got these sort of jinn who are influencing events, and these higher beings that are influencing events. And yeah, the series has been, it's grown from that initial premise to become, I think, something that's very epic and sort of world spanning and really cosmic, which is, as a lover of fantasy, that kind of series is always super fun to write.
Yeah, and I know. So book one, you focused on kind of two main characters, and then book two you focused on another pair of characters. So now, does the series kind of progress that way, where you're following different sets of characters throughout each book, or is it do we kind of circle back and revisit the same characters?
Yeah, so the third book does combine both the character sets from the first book and the second book. So it does circle back, and we do revisit old characters who become like the point of view characters again. New characters also come in, so it sort of does both in that it brings back like the old characters and the old storylines, and also introduces some new stuff. So I guess it's a very unorthodox, I think, approach because most fantasy series will just follow the same set of point of view characters. But I wanted each book to be really focused, so I didn't want to have like five points of view in each book,
Right.
and you know have the focus be all over the place. I really wanted each book to be focused on like a central conflict, and so whatever that central conflict is, only the relevant characters are like point of view characters. So the other characters
Right.
might be there in the background,
Yeah.
doing stuff.
Yeah, I feel like that's really cool. Now, when you set out to write Gunmetal Gods, did you kind of have an inkling that you might have this bigger scope of a story behind it?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Had I didn't have like the whole thing planned out, but I had a lot of different ideas for different things that could happen in the series. And even in the very first book, I seed a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of stuff in there that only now in the fourth book you kind of understand what that stuff was all about. So even when I started writing the first book, I was putting in a lot of ideas that I told myself, okay, if like this series becomes successful and I can actually write more books, I've put a lot in there that I can now expand upon and continue like this like I said, very cosmic sort of epic fantasy story.
Yeah, right. Yeah, really cool. Now, um, I'm interested to see how that all plays out in the in books three and four, and going forward as well. Do you have a planned number of books for the series? Like, do you have a kind of set number in your mind where you're going to finish it at?
Um, you know, I keep saying every time someone asks me that, I say one more book, but I've been saying that for a few years now. So
Okay.
uh, I'll when I sit down and when I write the fifth book, if I feel like I've done the story justice and I can end it without rushing through the storyline, that'll be the last book. But if that's not the
Hmm.
case, then there could be another book after that.
Right.
Uh, I do want to bring the series to a satisfying conclusion, but then often when I'm writing, I get more ideas and I get more, you know, just inspiration, and it ends up making the series longer. So I don't want to become like George R. R. Martin or anything and make a series that is too big to finish. So at some point, I will have to like write an ending.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. But I like that, you built a pretty in-depth world and a pretty incredible world. So I can definitely see how you'd want to stick with it and stay in the world and explore more of it. So I think that's really cool. And I mean, as long as readers are continuing to read the books, then you may as well keep writing it if you're enjoying it and there's more story to tell, right?
Definitely, that's ultimately if the readers want more, and I want to give them more. Why end it just to end it?
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I do want to talk about a bit about characters today and character development because the one thing that struck me, particularly in Gunmetal Gods, but in Conqueror's Blood as well, is your characters, your point of view characters, and the really the voice behind the characters. The one thing I like because I've been listening to it on audiobook, and the one thing that really struck me was that between the two points of view, they're similar characters in a lot of respect, but their voices are very different, and I think I didn't have to check back to see whose point of view I was listening to, because you did a really good job of distinguishing the voices between the two. So I do want to ask you a bit about your characters. Can you tell me, just about the process and how you come up with your characters and how you kind of develop them as either beforehand or as the story progresses?
Yeah, my philosophy with this series with characters is that the characters should be in one dimension very similar and in another dimension very different. So in Gunmetal Gods, I felt that the characters were outwardly very different. They have different religions. They have different. They belong to different nations, but inwardly they're very similar. They kind of want the same things. They want to, you know, reunite with their families that were lost to them. They want to serve their faith and flag. They're both warriors. So despite being very different in certain aspects, they were also very similar. And that's sort of the irony that I tried to show in the book is that these are like the same person, depending on where he was or depending on where they were born. They were doesn't matter how similar they are, they're gonna meet on the battlefield and have to fight each other.
Right.
Conqueror's Blood was kind of the opposite. So outwardly, these characters are very similar. So they're both
Hmm.
in the harem. They're both around the same age. They're both, the same religion, the same country, everything. But inwardly, they're completely different characters. They're completely different people, and that sort of gets to what you were saying about the voice,
Yeah.
because inwardly, they have, you know, different moral sensibilities. They have different. I mean, I don't want to spoil Conqueror's Blood, but one of the
Right.
characters is really not what she seems to be. They have different things that they hold on to as being precious and as being things that they, truly value. So that was the irony I tried to show in Conqueror's Blood is that these are characters who outwardly are very similar, but on the inside they're totally different, and and that's why it's sort of the opposite. It's sort of an opposite story to Gunmetal Gods because the conflict doesn't is not between two different nations and religions.
Yeah.
It's really about these people being different on the inside, and that is causing the conflict. So it's more of a
Right.
subtle story than Gunmetal Gods.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that definitely comes across quite clearly in the story. But it carries the same kind of tone as Gunmetal Gods, which I think is really cool because it is a very different story, but it's definitely set in the same world, and it doesn't feel, to me at least, disjointed from the first story. So it felt like a different story in the same world, which was really cool. And there are some crossover characters and that sort of thing, but to help with that. But it really didn't feel the tone of the story was very similar. Um, So when you're creating the main characters like that, do you kind of come up with the situation that they're living in first, and then create a character based on that, or does the character kind of come to you, and then you kind of figure out their situation based on that character?
It can it can be both. Um, I think characters, they really do start out as inspirations. So they can start out as very basic, just an inspiration. Oh, I want to write about like uh, a sorcerer who is transported 500 years into the future, and then you just build a scenario around that character. And obviously, well, that kind of character is going to have a lot of internal and external conflict. Um, and and I think a lot of my characters start with that kind of inspiration, because that's sort of a cool thing you can do in fantasy, is you can do something like that. You can't do that in a lot of other genres. I guess you could do that in sci-fi, but you can't do that in historical fiction, obviously. You
Right.
can't do that, so I always try to begin with a fantasy idea, um, and then sort of I try to ground it with the content, with this, like, in Conqueror's Blood, they're living in the harem. They're in this Middle Eastern style city, and for the first few chapters, I just try to ground the story and
Hmm.
make it seem sort of believable and relatable and real. And when I do that, then the other aspects of the characters sort of develop. Their other qualities, and I try to give it a few chapters to allow the characters to breathe and to show us who they are before,
Right.
like, the big conflict begins.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I guess in leading into that, like, are you an outliner? Like, do you outline your story, or are you pantsing as you're writing?
Yeah, mostly a pantser.
Really?
I do have a good sense of where the story is going. I do have a lot of things that I'm building up to, like scenes that I'm building up to, revelations, things that I've seeded that I'm trying to develop. So I do have a lot of that, but I have found that when I do plotting, uh, I'm not in the character's state of mind.
Yeah.
I'm in like a writer state of mind, a logical state of mind. And then when it's time for the character to do what I've plotted, suddenly the character, it doesn't make sense for them to do it. They don't want to do it. And that's not the way the story can go. So I don't
Right.
plot to that extent. Um, and I sort of just, I have to let the character do what they want to do. To me, that's the most important thing in the story, actually.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I like that, and I definitely understand that sentiment because I've had that happen myself. So now, does that happen? I guess because you said you had different endpoints in mind for the story to progress. How has the characters? Have you found that the characters will often take things in a completely different direction and really, upend what you had planned for the story, completely?
Well, this is where you do have to be a writer, and or rather, you do have to be like this cruel cosmic god, or not that you take away the character's free will, but you put them in situations which make what you want them to do much more much more compelling to them. So, if and usually that means increasing the level of suffering that they're going through. You can do this with side characters coming in and creating new conflicts for them. So, like, if the character just wants to run away from the conflict, and doesn't want to engage with the conflict and just wants to go, like, far away, you're not going to have a story there. So you do have to uh, you know, create scenarios that will put a fire under the character's feet and will motivate them to act the way you want them to, in a natural way.
Right.
And yeah, that's sort of the beauty of writing, and the way that you are the puppet master as the writer. You're bringing, you're not forcing the character. You're not obviously it's strange to say that the character has free will when this is a creation of your mind, but that's really how I think of it. I really do
Yeah.
think of them as people, who will only do what they're gonna do. And so I have to make it so that they do those things, but not by just changing their motivation, but by introducing scenarios that make that choice, more likely.
Yeah, right. I think a lot of writers would definitely understand where you're coming from when you talk about characters having free will, because it's incredible to me how often a character will just um, maybe not refuse to do something, but you realize that this character would never do this in this situation. The way that that character has been developed and their personality and whatnot. Um, but I guess like around that, has there ever been a time where you've kind of been surprised by one of your characters, how they've developed and how they, maybe did something or ended up in being a certain way that you weren't expecting when you first kind of envisioned them?
Yeah, characters definitely can go in surprising directions. So I've had characters who, um, sometimes I won't realize when I'm writing them, but in the background, I'm sort of showing another side to them that that will only reveal itself later, and it'll make sense because I was showing that side to them all along. Like characters who might be very villainous and might seem really cruel, all of a sudden feeling mournful and regretful and just feeling like, what have I been doing? And it's not me forcing them to feel that way. They have shown that side of them before. They've just been sort of keeping it in. And
Yeah,
then when you get to the point where you can naturally let them release it, it's very satisfying because it's sort of, it's what we love about stories. We love when characters, you know, are, we love when they change, when they grow, when they transform. So when you get to that organically, and sometimes it surprises you as the author because you've not, you're writing it in, but you don't really think, okay, it's going to lead to this, but then it does.
right. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And how much of that, I guess, because you're dealing with characters' motivation as well, and what they're not acting kind of in a vacuum of decision. Um, how much of that motivation for your characters are you putting in up front, and how much of it is being revealed to you, I guess, through the process of writing?
So you mean how much do I know about their motivation, or how much does
Yeah,
the
like
reader know?
how much do you know? Like when you
How
first
much do I?
start writing, let's say like in Gunmetal Gods, you have your two main characters have very similar but very different motivations and behind their actions. How much of that, I guess, do you know up front, and how much of it gets developed as the story goes on for you?
Yeah, so with Gunmetal Gods, it was their motivations were quite simple. So I knew, like at the very start, what their motivations were. I knew that I didn't want to reveal everything immediately to the reader.
Okay.
So but within the first few chapters, it was very very clear to the reader who these characters were, what their like pain points are, what they're why they're feeling the way they're feeling, and once that motivation is set, it usually lasts the whole story. So I don't tend to later on introduce like another hidden motivation that they had, uh, because it feels a little bit, you know it can feel a little bit ham-fisty, because these are first person stories. So
Yeah.
the reader
Right.
should know what they're thinking, right? And unless they're really hiding something from themselves, like they've gone through trauma and they're repressing it, which I did do in the second book to some extent. Um, unless that's the case, then the reader should know their motivation, like within a few chapters.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, how much, I guess, of the character's environment do you take into consideration, like how their cultural differences and that sort of thing? Do you take into consideration as you're developing them as well?
Yeah, that's always huge because this I try to to keep my characters to be very organically part of their time period and their society. And so it's very important for me uh, to have that sort of authenticity to the characters. So you know, like with some of the characters, they're not, I think Syra in Conqueror's Blood, for example, She moved around a lot in her life, and so she has elements to her character that are from her home when she was living in like with the steppe nomads, and then her home now when she's living in like this big cosmopolitan city. So it's to me it's very important to recognize that and to put different aspects of where she's been and of who she's been living with, and to put that into her character, into her personality, into her behaviors, and so that it all feels like very organic and believable.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I mean, and how much of that? I mean, because you're if you're a pantser, how much of the cultures? Because you have several different cultures that exist in the world that you've introduced, at least. Um, do you have that all planned out and written down somewhere? Do you just have it in your head? How do you develop these different societies and different cultures and religions and everything that you have going on while still pantsing the story?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's often what a lot of people wonder. I think for me, a lot of it is that I read a lot of history, so I have this kind of innate desire to reproduce the complexity that I find in history in my own story.
Hmm.
So I will know that, okay, in this country that I'm writing about, there are like several religions being practiced. There are several different ethnic groups. There are several different, you know, there are people who are living like a semi-nomadic style of life. There are people living in the cities. So I'll kind of know this when I start writing out. It'll start like populating in my mind, and I'll
Okay.
start getting the sense of how the society is, and I'll start seeing it. I'll start sort of dreaming it and seeing how it is. And this is sort of my desire to create something as complex as real life or as complex as history, but not
Hmm.
but also you know obviously it has to be simplified, or it has to be done in a digestible way for readers. uh, but for me, making a world that is like I guess they call this hard world building, right? Doing that and making the world feel uh, like really complex and layered, and something that you could imagine is like real. That is very satisfying for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like I'm interested though, like as far as like are you is that developing with the story, or do you have I mean, I know you're on your your fourth book and you're probably starting to write your fifth. So you have a lot of your world set now.
Yeah.
But starting out, like did you kind of have these everything planned out beforehand? Like did you have that set out before the story even began, or did it kind of just develop with alongside the story itself?
I definitely didn't have everything developed when I
Yeah.
began writing. Um, but in the first book, like for example, the fourth book is set in Crucius, so that's the Western Empire. That's where the fourth book is mainly set. So a lot of the things that the fourth book portrays are in the first book. They're just sort of expanded upon and and they're more like you zoom in and you focus more and you see the granular detail. Now
Right.
the overarching ideas were all there in the first book, but
Hmm.
the granular stuff and the nitty gritty details and the more zoomed in stuff, that I of course developed as I wrote the fourth book. I didn't sort of just have it and have that level of detail just sitting there like in a Word document or in my head. I didn't have it to that extent.
Okay.
And to me, that's one of the fun things about writing. Like if I had everything planned beforehand and I couldn't like create stuff and add detail and add more layers, it would be a lot less, I think, enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. How about now? Like now that you're, your fourth book is done, how much of that world do you have written out? Like, do you have to go back and check what you've said before so you don't contradict yourself, or do you just have it all in your head and kind of know, what's what and what needs to be where?
Yeah, so I've started now writing down a lot of notes and writing down a lot of uh, writing down like big spreadsheets about stuff, because it's now when you get to a fifth book, or even the fourth book, things are pretty unwieldy in the sense that you don't have a lot of freedom to just play around with the history like you did in the first book, play
Mhm.
around with what, the lore and all that. You have to abide by everything that came before, and to the minuscule detail. So I know in my head, like, obviously the bigger stuff, and to a certain degree of detail, but yeah, there's a lot of nitty gritty stuff that, so like my beta readers actually caught some of this, that I made a mistake, like certain aspects of lore. I had beta readers catch this and tell me. So then I sort of realized, okay, I better like have a more comprehensive system of keeping this stuff, you know, uh, written down. So I've
Right.
started to do that. But I think, I can't. I there will always be something I miss, so I will have to depend on beta readers sometimes to find these things.
Yeah, I've heard that that's a really good way for authors to kind of catch those things because readers are often more attuned to those details than
Yeah.
I think than sometimes we are. Like, I mean, I think for myself, like, I mean, well, Gunmetal Gods, you wrote, was that 2019 that came out?
Yep.
So it's
2020, but I wrote it in
20,
2019.
yeah. So I mean, it's something you wrote 5 years ago, and you're trying to, recall all of the
Yeah.
details that, that you came up with back then, and a lot of it, especially if you're pantsing it, you probably, I mean, a lot of those details maybe didn't stick. So you're coming back to it now in book five, where your beta readers maybe read the book last week, book one, and they've read all the way through, and now they get to see those, I mean, continuity things that us as authors sometimes forget, right? Or
Absolutely. It's super helpful.
yeah.
Um, and I think I remember George R. R. Martin also mentioned this, where he was like, "Oh, I forgot the gender of one of the horses or something,"
Hmm.
and like one of my beta readers reminded me. Or I don't think he has beta readers; he has like a whole team of like editors. So yeah,
Yeah.
when things get, yeah, that complex, it's daunting, because I do feel like, oh, what if I met, even now, when I released the fourth book, I have this fear, like, what if I messed something up, like
Hmm.
no one caught it, there's like a continuity error in there somewhere, and I only realized later with great horror. So it's one of the, uh yeah, it's an epic fantasy thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm interested about your beta readers and your process there too. Now, how many beta readers do you send your books to?
Yeah, I have a lot of beta readers. In the beginning, it was only like three or four, but now I use around 20.
Oh wow.
And yeah, so it's, and I send it to them somewhat early in the process. So because I want to catch a lot of these errors early on.
Hmm.
And what I noticed was, some at time, like when I send out the arcs, that was when I was catching a lot of errors, and I didn't want it to be that late in the
Yeah,
process.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, um, so they are obviously previous readers. How do you find your beta readers?
Most of them are from, or yeah, they're from my mailing list. So I'll
Oh, okay.
send out like an email, asking people if they want to be beta readers, and then I'll choose, like 20 of them, and
Okay.
maybe about half of them will actually do it and finish it, which
Okay.
is usually a good amount of like feedback to get. And it's good, you can see, like, okay, did like three people complain about the same thing, then it's
Right.
definitely something I need to look at and change.
Okay.
If it's only one person complaining about something, and I kind of don't see it, then I'll just leave it. So it helps to have like a lot of eyes early on in the process.
Yeah, really cool. Yeah, I have like one or two readers that I'll send it to early, and I that's about all I use at this point. So yeah, I'm just curious. Yeah, I was going to ask you about how you sift through all the feedback, but that makes if you're sending out 20 and you're getting 10 back, and then you're just kind of looking for trends, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's work
How did
it's
you
worked so far.
Yeah, how did you find your beta readers to begin with? Like when you sent out Gunmetal Gods, I guess for the first time, because now obviously you've
Oh,
built up a readership since then. How did I guess like for writers maybe who are listening that are just starting out, what how did you find your early beta readers?
so my first beta reader was one of my good friends, who's like a fantasy reader.
Okay.
So He was my very first beta reader and the first person I showed the story to. And his feedback, and this was super early, after like the first draft. So his feedback was huge to polishing that. Then I found my second beta reader on Reddit, on the fantasy writers subreddit, and she was super like detailed and really helpful. And those were the two major ones. And then later in the process, I found like another beta reader, but by then it was already pretty polished, so I didn't get too much useful feedback. So early on, yeah, it was a lot more difficult than it is now.
Right. Okay. Very cool. Um, yeah, I want to circle back a little bit to your characters again. I know we've talked about that a lot, but there's a couple things I'm curious about. Your characters are fairly unlikable in a lot of ways. Your main characters. So I'm interested to know, how do you create these characters that are maybe not the best people, but create them in a way that readers are still invested in them, that they want to follow them along in the story.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is a thing that I always think about when I'm writing the characters, because I know that I put sort of these uh, traits in the character that are unlikable and that predispose them toward, let's just say, cruel behavior. And I show the reader why they're this way, and a lot of the story also hinges on you know these like if you're a really ambitious person, a lot of ambitious people are willing to just throw who they use to the side, and that's very unlikable. But those are the people who become president. Those are the
Yeah.
people who rise in power, and this is the
Mhm.
sad irony of life, right? So that's sort of what I wanted to write about. But
Yeah.
House of Cards, I don't know if you've seen that show, but it's the
Mhm.
perfect example of
Yeah.
what I just said. And a lot of my characters sort of have that you know. But I remember watching that show. I was totally invested in what the character was doing, and I think it's
Mhm.
because when you have a character who's really motivated, they don't need to be likable necessarily. Just their motivation alone and what they're trying to do, and maybe their cleverness or their skill in a certain uh, area. These things make us want to watch them, and they're captivating. And we may not like them. We may even actively root against them, but we want to know what's going to happen to them. We want to know what
Mhm.
they're going to do next. And so that's kind of the philosophy I've used with writing these characters.
Yeah. Do you find, as the writer of these characters, that you struggle with having that balance of, having this character do something that, you're not, I mean, not that you don't, maybe not don't want to happen, no, that you're making them do something that needs to happen for the
Yep.
plot. But you're struggling, but you're writing this character and you're investing yourself into this character as well. Like, do you struggle with that as a writer, balancing that motivation versus their unlikability?
Yeah, certainly. It's a character can't be well in my view, in my philosophy of these characters, they can't be 100% irredeemable. There always has to be this small hope that they will heal themselves and change and become better. And I think having that there gives some readers more of a reason to stomach them and to hope when you read their story, and to sort of hope that, okay, maybe they'll change. Maybe there's like a side character who they love, who's a good person, trying to motivate them to do good. That sort of thing. There has to be something in there, um, and that I feel it helps balance the character. Now the characters, you know, that doesn't mean they're not going to do horrible things as the story progresses. And when they do something that's really horrible, of course the readers, even if they're rooting for the character on a certain level, even if they're attached to the character and want to know what's going to happen, they're going to be horrified at what happened, and they're not going to like that this happened. And so you do have to sort of understand that. And as a writer, you do have to know when to sort of pace those events. Like obviously, Micah has a big one in the first book,
Hmm.
and then if it was just one thing after another, I think his reading him would be intolerable. It would be a lot more difficult than it is. But that event happens, and then certain other things happen that you know might make Michael, he suffers a little bit. It might make him more sympathetic. So I do try to balance those things, and not have a character just be totally uh, devoid of any goodness, and have their story just be them committing cruelty after cruelty.
Right. Yeah, I think your I think what you're saying is, you're instilling some humanity in them, that even though they, their motivations are driving them to do these things that are, horrific in a lot of ways, um, you're rounding them out as a character,
Yes.
right? Like you're giving them some, redeeming moments at the very least, and delving into a little bit of their personal relationships and seeing kind of those moments as well.
Yeah, because my philosophy really is that um, a lot of the things we perceive as evil are not done by people who think they're evil.
Hmm.
They're done by people who believe they're good and that they're doing good. People who otherwise they might love their families, they love their children. They feel they're good people, but they do evil, and you know that's what it means to be human. Is that you can compartmentalize certain things that you do, but be totally decent in other aspects of your life. When you see like these villains that are just mustache twirling and they're always being assholes 100% of the time, I'm sure there are people like that in the world, but most of the evil that we see is not done by those kind of people. It's done by people who think they're good people and that they're doing good. Now, that's my philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, you know, just from reading history and even current events and everything. So that's sort of what inspires me to write these characters, because I myself also want to understand it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think those the villains that are just doing, just being evil for the sake of being evil as well, uh, it's they're not interesting. They're not. It's not as interesting as seeing someone who is doing bad things because they think that it's going to lead to a good thing, or that they think that they're doing the right thing for whatever whatever reasoning they have. It's those, I think, reasonings that make those characters more interesting.
Absolutely. That's, I think, a big reason why I write these kind of characters. I want to explore that. And I know that, not every reader wants to engage with that. And which is why a lot of people will say, okay, these characters are too unlikable. I can't read this book. Um, but for those who do read it and who do, enjoy that kind of uh, you know, introspection and journey. My hope is that it does shed some light on how people can have these sort of contradictory natures.
Yeah. Do you think that the genre of dark fantasy lends itself more to those type of characters, that readers are willing to tolerate a little bit more of that sort of behavior from the main characters of the story?
Yeah, definitely. There's dark fantasy, there's grim dark, and readers of those subgenres do like that kind of thing. And um, there are a lot of great characters in fantasy who exhibit that kind of dual nature that we're talking about, and I find it very fascinating. To me, it's endlessly fascinating. So if I ever feel like I can't write those kind of characters and I kind of have to write more cookie cutter good versus evil characters, it would be very disappointing to me. So yeah, my hope is that readers, there will always be readers within fantasy who do want that.
For sure. Now, you said that you look at examples from history. Like, are there specific examples that you kind of look at when you're developing your characters, or do you just kind of take more of just a vague sense of who people are or have been throughout history, and when you're looking at the events that you're writing about?
Yeah, a lot of the time I'm definitely inspired by historical events. Like I mentioned, the Crusades for Gunmetal Gods. When you read about the Crusaders on the First Crusade, they thought they were doing something really good, and it comes across very clearly. And they have a sense of honor, they have a sense of duty, they have a sense of God, obviously religiosity. But it's not just that they're religious, they have a sense of honor, they have a sense that they're doing something they need to do to save, certain people. But
Hmm.
then when they conquered, Jerusalem, they literally just killed like everyone. So that's sort of that kind of duality is what uh, inspired some of the events in Gunmetal Gods, in
Yeah.
particular with Micah the Metal, because I wanted to understand how can otherwise people who hold their morals very dearly, how can they suddenly do this? And they weren't remorseful. That's the other thing.
Right.
They didn't really show any remorse for it. They thought they had done the right thing. They thought they were avenging, injustice, or they thought they were, doing good. So
Yeah.
to me, it's an amazing thing. And the whole series explores this theme
Hmm.
endlessly, that people can come to the conclusion that, killing innocent people is good. Killing, children is good. Just, killing a lot of people is a good thing, right? And, we see it even in current events that people will justify it. I mean, I've seen it all my life, with the Iraq War, and then this war and that war and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Every time a war starts, people think it's just and it's fine to kill people in pursuit of a higher objective, right? So
Right.
it's to me, it's endlessly fascinating. It's colored, a lot of, uh, it's I've seen it in current events. So I'm inspired to write about that kind of thing, and to sort of show that, okay, these people making these decisions, um, they are not, even I can't call them evil, because evil is too much of a like all encompassing term. And so what
Mm-hmm.
do I call them? How do I understand them? That's sort of why I write the series.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's really impactful, I think, and especially just thinking of the events of Gunmetal Gods, and thinking these are it's not just a fantasy story, that this is inspired by something that has happened in human history, and like you said, continues to happen. Just makes it that more impactful, but gives you an avenue to write it in a format that I guess is more um, digestible for people, more approachable for people to kind of take a look at it, and try to understand those motivations, like you mentioned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Fantasy lets you do that.
Yeah, exactly. I think speculative fiction, I think in a lot of ways is why we write in those genres. Why a lot of people write in those genres, to explore those topics that maybe um, aren't as easy to write in other formats, other genres, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. One more question about characters. What advice do you have for other writers who are looking to create believable characters and dynamic characters?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, there's a lot, I think, that goes into it. Um, characters, to me, motivation plays a central role. And particularly for me as a reader, I like to read characters who are motivated, um, who want something, who want something really badly. And I feel like that, as a writer, when I know what a character wants, when I know what they're aching for with all their heart, and what they'll sacrifice, what they're willing to make sacrifices for, that's when I have what I need to start writing the character and to start putting stuff on the page. And from there, the whole story can take off. So for me, that's the defining trait of any character, is what do they want? And then you can ask other questions. Okay, why do they want that? That's a very important question. And you can tell that story. You can reveal that more slowly over the course of the story. Why have they become this way? Why are they obsessed with this one goal? Um, and then what challenges, will they have to face to overcome to get this? That sort of fills in the plot and fills in, sort of the arrow of the story. So yeah, that to me is the most important thing.
Cool. Yeah, I love that. That's great advice, and great something that people can take and use for their own writing, right? Yeah, I do want to. I know we're getting close to an hour here, so I do want to give you the chance to talk about Dark Drinker, the latest book in the Gunmetal Gods series. I know it's tough to talk about book four in a series, oftentimes, without giving too much away from earlier books. But what can you tell us about it that might not spoil previous books?
Sure, yeah. So, Dark Drinker, I mentioned already that it takes place in the Western continent of the story, whereas every other book has taken place in the Eastern continent that is more Middle Eastern in its inspiration. So the
Hmm.
Western continent is a lot more, I would say, Greek and Roman in its
Okay.
inspiration. So it was a chance for me to write like a different aesthetic and sort of something very different. More of a Western fantasy, but in the
Hmm.
Greek and Roman sense. So that
Great.
that is something which I think distinguishes the book. It also brings back a major character from the earlier books. So that's another thing I'll say. Um, and a character that a lot of people wanted to see more of.
Nice.
So it's a, you know, like I mentioned earlier, my philosophy for the series is not to just follow every character all the time. It's to really focus and hone in on a particular conflict. And so
Hmm.
it does sort of a lot. The characters in book three, for example, are not central to the plot in book four. And
Okay.
we'll, like with book five, my intention is to join the two together again, and to have, like, I guess, have everyone sort of there and on screen, and
Yeah.
but yeah, so that's what I can say about book four.
Okay, really cool. Now, was there a particular inspiration behind this installment and bringing it, to the Western continent?
Yeah, I think so. I think I I've been developing in all the books the the major empire that exists in the West, that is, plays a role in every single book. Obviously, in book one, it's a very central role, but we've never actually gotten to go there in the books, and we've never actually seen how people live there, and we've never seen what are the internal sort of struggles going on in that place. And so, book four. So my whole inspiration was to shed a lot of light on that, and to, you know basically build up this whole part of the world that readers had not gotten like a very close view of. And,
Hmm.
to me, doing that was very satisfying. It's a lot of world building and stuff, and a lot of lore, and putting all of that in. And then there's a central conflict, of course, uh, that occurs. And this allowed me not just to bring back an old character, but to create a new character as well, a totally new character, uh, and to have that character be very different from the previous characters that have appeared in the series, like completely
Okay.
different, in the
Okay.
sense that I'll just say that, like, they're more of a uh, you could say that they're a very ambitious merchant. Okay, now
Hmm.
that's something that has never
Okay.
really been in Gunmetal Gods. Like, think about the East India Company, for example.
Right.
Like a
Okay.
merchant so ambitious that they kind of want to take over territory, and
Right.
they want to impose their will, and uh, and they're also not super devoted to their religion like a lot of the other characters. So they're more malleable in that sense. Um, and then there's a lot more to the character as well. This is probably my most complex character that I've ever created. And one of the things I was very happy with was that the beta readers loved this character a lot. So I'm very excited for like that the series took this direction, and not just revisited an old character but added a new one. And I'm, really excited to, like, get back into that with book five, and to smash things together. Um, smash what's going on in the West and the East together, and write something really epic.
Very cool. That sounds really exciting, and I'm excited to get to it and read what happens in the next
Yeah.
couple of books here. So you mentioned that you're working on book five now. What can readers expect from you next? What kind of timeline do you have for book five coming out? I know that's hard to judge when book four just released. But what's kind of next on the horizon for you?
So yeah, before I write book five, I do want to write another novella. So
Hmm.
I already have Death Rider, which is the first novella. So I want to write a second one, and that's what I'm like right now. I'm taking a little bit of a break, but I've actually written a few chapters of this new novella, and it's going to be a lot more horror, even more horror focused than the main series. Like it's going to
Okay.
be, whereas the main series is fantasy first, horror second, this is going to be horror first, fantasy second. So it's
Okay.
going to be very horror focused. It's going to be set 600 years before Gunmetal Gods, uh, during a time where there was this extremely catastrophic war of succession, and it lasted 100 years. So even the people who were fighting over this throne, they died, and their grandchildren started
Hmm.
inherited that conflict. So it's probably the most destructive war in the history of like the lore. So it's going to
Right.
be set during that time period, but it's not necessarily going to focus on that war. It's going to focus on a lot of the horror, supernatural horror that is going on during
Okay.
that time. So I'm very
Yeah.
excited about this because it's takes me back to my roots as a horror author
Hmm.
and putting horror first in that sense. It's all about the horror and
Right.
a lot
Okay.
of the stuff next. So it's going to be a little bit different, but I'm excited to see where that goes. And then book five is probably going to be the longest book in the series by some measure because it's going to have more points of view than the other
Yeah.
books,
Right.
and it's going to take to write such a long book. It will take some time. So I think next year, toward the end of the year, is a good time to expect that. And then the novella that I'm writing, I'm hoping to get it done by like January, basically, done
Oh,
and launched.
very. Yeah. Very cool. That's a quick timeline, and I'm sure
Yeah.
readers are excited to hear that.
And one more thing is the
Yeah.
Kickstarter for book two.
I was going
So
to ask you
that,
about that.
yeah, that is coming up. We're gonna do the fulfillment for book one. Hopefully, if everything goes, the books are like being shipped right now to the US. Hopefully by the end of October, and then the book two Kickstarter should launch like mid-November.
Very cool. Very cool. That's really exciting. Those, I mean, the
Yeah.
special edition for book one looked amazing. I'm really excited to see how book two looks. For those that missed the first Kickstarter, will there be a chance to grab the first one in the upcoming Kickstarter?
Yep. Absolutely.
Wonderful, wonderful. I can't wait to see that. The illustrations looked incredible. And yeah, how has the fulfillment been going for you in that regard? Has it been, because I mean, with such a big Kickstarter, I know I ran a Kickstarter myself. It wasn't as big as yours, but still the fulfillment was quite an undertaking. So how have you found that?
Yeah. There are surprises along the way. There are
Hmm.
delays. Uh, but overall, it's been good. Overall, it's been, it hasn't gone, there haven't been any major problems. There haven't been any like issues that we couldn't solve.
Hmm.
And, I have you can't really see it, but I have the dummy copy right there in the back, and it's really
Okay.
beautiful. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know if you can see it. It's
It's
like,
a little dark,
yeah, it's,
but
it's quite dark, but it's like next to the bird. It's like right there.
yeah.
But yeah, just when I got that in my hands, I was ecstatic because it's as beautiful as promised, and the illustrations inside look beautiful. If it's like I was so happy, and I the day that the backers receive their books, it's going to be amazing. So yeah, uh, overall I'm very happy with how things went.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah, and absolutely, you should be. I think it turned out amazing, and I'm glad that it was really successful for you. So what? And sorry, when did you say that the Kickstarter for the second book is going to launch, or
Should
what's the
be
plan?
in mid-November, I would
Mid
say.
November.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. So we'll keep an eye out for that. So, Zamil, this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I know you've answered this question once before, and it actually has been one of my favorite answers I've gotten to this question. But if you have a different answer, I'd love to hear it. Can you tell me how, in a parallel universe, a different decision might have shaped another version of your life?
Oh, that's a great question because I've man, but book four actually deals with this topic a little bit.
Okay.
So I've been thinking about it a lot. Um, yeah, man, there are so many small things. I actually
Hmm.
don't remember what answer I gave you
The answer
first
you gave
times.
me last time was about your decision to write Gunmetal Gods, how you decided to
Oh,
go to a hookah shop one
yeah,
day
yeah,
with your
yeah, yeah.
friend.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. That really is the momentous one. Okay, let's go back let's go back to uh, when I was a kid. All right,
Okay.
so I'm in
Hmm.
third grade, and we are doing like this project where we talk about our favorite sport, and then we
Okay.
write like we draw a picture of it and we put it on the wall.
Hmm.
So my favorite sport was cricket. Okay,
Okay.
now I know that's a scary word for a lot of people because it's but yeah, my favorite sport was and still is cricket. So
Yep.
I went around in the class and I saw which other boys had drawn like pictures of cricket, and
Hmm.
then I went to go talk to them because I wanted to like talk about cricket with them. Okay,
Nice.
so
Yeah.
there was this one kid who I went to talk to, and he was like, you know, I don't really like cricket, but I didn't know what else to draw. All right,
Okay. Yeah.
so then I was like, okay, whatever. And then he was like, hey, you want to come over to my house? And I remember thinking, why should I go to this guy's house? He doesn't really like cricket. But I
Hmm.
was like, all right, I'll go to your house, whatever. And so when I went to his house, he showed me this video game called Final Fantasy.
Hmm.
And I had never heard of this game before.
Right.
And I played it at his house and I thought, wow, this is really cool. Can I borrow this? And he let me borrow it. And then I played Final
Nice.
Fantasy, and that's what started my interest in fantasy.
Your love of fantasy.
So,
That is really cool.
and it was all because he lied about liking cricket.
Right, and that, yeah, and not only, I mean, he you could have easily just said, no, I'm not interested in coming over. You don't like
Yeah,
cricket, or, and he could have not asked you to come over. I mean, there's so many little things
it's
in that
so
in that one
it's so
interaction that could have
strange, right?
changed that.
It's
Yeah.
so strange. Like, but that is literally I've never heard of Final Fantasy. I'd never played like an RPG before, and that
Hmm.
is literally what's began my interest in fantasy. So it's
Yeah.
it's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, that is really cool. And to
Yeah.
think that, who knows how long it would have been after that that you might have encountered, something similar that maybe wouldn't have shaped you in the same way as it had at that age, right?
Yeah, that
So
was the
yeah.
third grade. That's a very formative time. What you're doing, what you're consuming at that
Mhm.
time, tends to
Yeah,
stay with you, for your whole life. So absolutely.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think back to watching, Star Trek and that at that age as well. So that was definitely
Yeah.
formative for me. So yeah, I
No,
mean,
I used to watch Star Trek as well.
nice.
It's yeah.
Yeah. Love it. I love it, Samil. Can you let our listeners know where they can best find you and how they can grab copies of your books?
Sure. So all my books are available on Amazon. That's generally the best place to find them. You can also get the paperbacks at Barnes and Noble. So you can find me at zamilakhtar.com. That's my website, and all my social media information is on there. Um, and yeah,
Wonderful. I'll be sure to link everything in the show notes below for our listeners. Thank you once again for coming on. This has been fantastic. I've absolutely loved this conversation. I feel like we could probably chat for another hour if we if we wanted, but we'll not take away too much time. It is the evening for you, so I'll let you do what you need to do tonight. So, but yeah, thanks again. This has been fantastic.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Just like last
Yeah,
time, it was a lot of fun, and it's great. Uh, it's great to talk to you.
yeah, it's been great. We'll have to catch up again maybe when book five comes out next year or something. But
Definitely, definitely.